This is my second video on why worldviews matter. In the first video, I mentioned that worldviews are stories or sets of stories that we tell ourselves about what reality is made of, who we are, who we belong with, what our goals and values are. And they're stories that for the most part we don't hold very consciously. And in part these stories are personal, but they're also composed of stories we grew up with. For the most part, they operate unconsciously. They just seem like this is how the world is. That's what a worldview does in terms of filtering our experience. So I mentioned I was going to give examples of broken worldviews or outworn worldviews, ones that don't really work anymore. And then in the last video, talk about what the alternatives are. So in this video, I want to talk about traditional patriarchal religion as a worldview. And in the next video, I want to talk about the materialist worldview. It's sometimes called the scientific worldview, but for reasons I'll explain then, it should be called the scientistic worldview instead. But in this video, we'll be on about patriarchal religion. And a couple of things to know up front. So patriarchy is, depending on which scholars you ask and what histories you read, anywhere from 8,000 to 5,000 years old. That's a very small sliver of human history. So before that, we had pre-patriarchal religions in all corners of the globe. And today, we've got all kinds of indigenous religions, people who have left the patriarchal religions behind. And here in the United States, the largest, quote, religious group for some time now has been the group called nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And they're mostly spiritual but not religious people with some atheists and agnostics mixed in. And they're growing. They have been for some time now. So, traditional religions, what are some of the problems? There are many. I'm only going to mention a few though, in terms of what we're talking about, which is when worldviews don't serve anymore. So think of this and worldviews in general as a kind of map that we use to navigate with. It's as though, in terms of traditional religion, we were using maps that were made before the Middle Ages even. So you can imagine how accurate that map would be. It's like those old maps you see where there's one continent, which is where Europe is usually. And at the edges, it says, "Here be dragons," right? So imagine that you've spread that map out on a large flat table and you're using that to navigate with. You're using it to determine the nature of the cosmos, which, you know, before Einstein, we didn't even know about other galaxies. So that's how recent all that is. But anyway, you've got the old map. This is what the cosmos looks like. It's full of spheres with Earth in the center. And gender binaries, strict gender binaries, male, female, that's all you get. And other things too, other values, other goals, other ideas about our place in the world. So the map is old. That's the first problem. It's old and it needs updating. Another problem is that we take maps like this too literally. I should say when we do, because not everybody does. So when we forget that the map isn't what the map describes, and we say our teachings are literal and invariable, our ideas, our creeds, our books, all set in stone for all time to come. What we're doing is we're actually, you're looking at the map and you see this hill and then there's the good place beyond that you need to get to. So you climb up on the table and you start walking on the hill on the map down there. And then you get to the good place on the map and you say, I've made it to the good place. No, you haven't. Because the map isn't the territory. That's what literalism confuses, right? So that's a second problem. The map is not only old and outdated, but taking it literally confuses the territory with the map itself. Third, patriarchal religions, and I don't just mean the big three, which is a very Western way of seeing religion, by the way. Leaves out Buddhism and Hinduism and bunches of others, right? Patriarchal religion, psychologically, is often a setup for authoritarianism, for the lure of authoritarianism. There's one male authority who determines absolute truth for everybody, and you got to follow the authority. That's authoritarianism. So that's another problem. It's as though this map is the only one that's possible, and you have to use my map. And if you don't, I'll force you to, right? So a fourth problem with taking traditional religion authoritatively, literally, and all the rest is that it's just not emotionally satisfying for some of us. In depth psychology, we often use the word numinous, which when you encounter something numinous, it feels sacred and huge. It fills you with awe and sometimes fear and even terror. It's an overwhelming spiritual experience, which is what religion's supposed to be about. And for a lot of us, it isn't that. And when that happens, you pretty much have to go elsewhere. Because, you can shove all that down into your unconscious, which a lot of us tried to do. I tried to do that when I was growing up in a church. And blame yourself. All these people really seem into Jesus. It must be me that's the problem. Well, me and millions of other people, right? So that's not workable. And that actually brings me to another problem, number 5, which is when you're using an old map literalistically and authoritarianly. Is that a word? I guess it is now. It brings a number of important side effects psychologically. So it takes a lot of repression. It takes a lot of splitting, especially in a planetary culture like ours, where you're exposed to other viewpoints all the time. Think of the unconsciousness that it takes to say, my viewpoint is right, my map is right, even though it's outdated, and everybody else's is wrong. So massive splitting, and this leads to paranoia, huge projections onto other people, so you're constantly accusing them of what you yourself are actually doing. There's an overemphasis on belief. In my second dissertation for my PhD in philosophy and religion, I talked about the need for absolute belief as a defensive structure. It's to combat uncertainty. When you can't live with ambiguity, you tend to be attracted to absolute belief. But if your absolute belief is different from his absolute belief, you're going to fight. So one of the things I raised in my dissertation that I'll talk more about at the end is, what if we just did away with absolute belief altogether? So with all this comes contempt and hate. And this isn't just for the people who hold the traditional religious worldview in this way. It applies to the other worldviews I'm going to mention, because one of the signs that your worldview is worn out is that you are completely contemptuous and intolerant of people who don't share it. So that's kind of a giveaway. People have asked, is it possible to reform patriarchal religions? I hear a lot of that within Christianity, friends who are Christian, colleagues who are Christian. Well, it's been 2,000 years. And it's still doing damage, so good luck with that. I think that we need to come to a point, at least for some of us, where we've just had enough. So one last thing to say in this, and then next time, like I said, we'll talk about materialism as a worldview. As depth psychology has taught us, to think we can just do without the old map that we grew up in invites bringing it back unconsciously. So it would help more to take different aspects of it that are still valuable, keep those, and get a new map. So, when I look back over what I learned, all those things about do not murder, that always seemed like a good idea to me. Feed the poor seems like a good idea. Welcome the stranger, that's a good one. A lot of these are solid. And you notice that a lot of them are shared by many different religions. So do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's in Judaism before it's in Christianity. It's also in Confucianism, if we think of that in religious terms. So these seem like good ideas. And there are important lessons that we've learned from all these faiths. So integrating the lessons into our lives allows us the opportunity to build a new map. So we'll talk more about that in the last video.